Michael Cepidosa Campos, and on behalf of the Department of Theology and Religious Education of De La Salle University, the Religious Educators Association of the Philippines, and the Women's and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines, we welcome you to the 7th Roundtable discussion commemorating 500 years of Christianity in our country. These webinar series are organized around the theme Post-Colonial Christianities in the Philippines, 500 years and beyond. Conversations examine the colonial, neo-colonial, dominant, metropolitan interests that endure in cultural texts, artifacts, and practices of Filipino Christianity. The thrust of these roundtables is deconstructive, welcoming decolonizing theologies and indigenization strategies that regard culture as dynamic, heterogeneous, and subject to contestations of power. Today and this morning, we are privileged to welcome scholars and practitioners who will address the theme gender, feminism, and LGBTQIA+ encounters. Conversations will be moderated by Professor Jean Peraculio, a faculty member of the Department of Philosophy of De La Salle University and a member of the Women's and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines. Before we embark on the roundtable, I would like to invite you to consider the following logistics for smooth proceedings. Please be mindful of the privacy guidelines now displayed on your screen. Please know that this will be recorded for reference and that it is being live streamed via the Facebook page of the Department of Theology and Religious Education of DLSU. Please post your questions for our speakers either through Zoom's Q&A feature or the FB page of DTRE. We encourage you to please complete the evaluation at the end of the webinar. This will be used to account for the attendance of those who are obtaining CPD points. And so we open our gathering through the invitation of Professor Mylene Icamina Maravilla, faculty of the Department of Theology and Religious Education, who will call us to prayer.
Sorry everyone if there's no sound, so I have to take over. Sa ngalan ng kaloobang walang kasing ganda at ng mukhang lubos na kaaya-aya at ng paramdam na tunay na nakagiginhawa. O Diyos ng sanlilikha, bukal ng pag-ibig, kaalaman at ng aming pag-iral, Ikaw ay Diyos ng tanan. Kami ay nagpapasalamat sa biyaya ng pagkakakilanlan, kasarian, mga ekspresyon at seksualidad. Tulungan mo kaming matutunan ang tunay na pakikipagkapwa. Sa panahon ng duda at pangamba sa aming sarili, paalalahanan mong kami ay sa iyo. Sa panahon ng karakasan, ipakita mo sa amin ang daan ng kapayapaan. Sa gitna ng kasamaan, tulungan mo kaming piliin ang kabutihan. Sa pagkakataon ng puot, ipanauli mo kami sa iyong pag-ibig. Ipanumbalik mo kami sakaling kami ay mapawalay. Sa panahon ng alinlangan, ipaalala mong ikaw ang humubog sa amin at ang aming mga karanasan ay bahagi ng aming pagkakakilanlan. Kami nawa ay mamanahan sa iyong kapayapaan, pag-ibig at unawa. Sa iyong liwanag, karunungan at puso. Amen.
Maraming salamat po, Professor Maravilla, for the prayer. And so at this point, we invite Dr. Roderick V. Nuncio, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts at De La Salle University, to offer our welcoming remarks.
To our distinguished speakers, Mr. Percy Intalan, Dr. J. Neil Garcia, Dr. Lizette Tapia Roquel, to the organizers, the chair, vice chair, and faculty members of the Department of Theology and Religious Education, to our guests, to our participants, graduate students, pleasant morning to all. In our country, the way we perceive and perform our gender and sexuality is influenced greatly by our religion. Anything deviant to the dogmatic notions of what a natural man and woman should be is suppressed and condemned. When your power and value are minimized and your identity is demonized, it is not surprising that many feel unwelcome within the Catholic Church, which eventually prompts them to leave. However, there are still those who choose to stay. These people understand that just like our genders and identities, how we practice our religion, faith, and spirituality can be fluid. The Bible and the Church may be inspired by the divine grace of God, but it remains a human institution bound by time, influenced by culture, and therefore susceptible to change. The religion preached by the Spaniards is no longer the same religion practiced today. We have certainly become more accepting, and the Catholic Church's doctrine reflects that. One of the constitutions that came out of Vatican II, which is Gaudium et Spes, states, with respect to the fundamental rights of the person, every type of discrimination, whether social or cultural, whether based on sex, race, color, social condition, language, or religion, is to be overcome and eradicated as contrary to God's intent. For in truth, it must still be regretted that fundamental personal rights are still not being universally honored. Granted that in writing and in practice, there is still much to be desired, but this is clearly heading in the right direction. And in order for our church to change for the better, we must engage in open conversation with each other and share each of our lived experiences, because it is more valuable than blind, and literal adherence to the written word, especially if we're able to identify the faults and the deficiencies of this institution and work towards creating amendments and solutions. Many have weaponized scriptures to fuel their hate and bias. Such people pick and choose verses and remove them from their context to justify the anger that they feel towards people who are different from them or lesser than them, all the while ignoring the true spirit of the book, which is unconditional love and forgiveness. It is in this spirit that we should engage with each other, all in the hope of creating a fair and welcoming religious community. In my spiritual journey, I was influenced by my exposure to educational institutional affiliations. I went to Philippine Christian University in my high school, where I was a frequent visitor of the UTS library in Dasmariñas, Cavite. Then went to San Beda for my AB philosophy, which enlightened me about Catholic social teachings, side-by-side critical theory, and to be a student leader activist frontlining the gates of Loyola. Where I and got engaged with various my journey continues and my life unfolds the way you do in your own terms, struggles, and triumphs. Our own narratives, spiritual journeys are intertwined with our identities and philosophies in life. May this forum bring forth the blossoming of heightened faith across religions, genders, sexualities, and identities. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat.
Maraming salamat po, Dean Nuncio, for those inspiring opening words. Thank you. To the extent that a lot of our conversations explore the context of religion, it is important for us to begin to inquire what we mean by post-colonial conditions. The common language that frames and scaffolds these roundtables address the issue or question of post-colonial theory. As a framework of critique, post-colonial theory interrogates the, quote, political, aesthetic, economic, historical, and social impact of European colonial rule, from the age of conquest to modernity. As a system of literary and cultural analysis, post-colonial theory has roots in the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in 1978. For Said, Orientalism demonstrates how every branch of knowledge is, quote, part and parcel of European hegemony through the process of colonial conquest and domination. Colonialism has not really ended, but rather persists in other structures of domination today. In short, the world we inhabit can only be understood through imperialism and the worldview of enduring post-coloniality. The quote, post suggests more a desire to go beyond the colonial in all its manifestations, as expressed in various forms of resistance in the past and in the present. In the Philippines, the post-colonial condition is defined largely, although not exclusively, through the lens of the Spanish Catholic imperial project. When we think of, quote, Filipino culture, we almost always conceive of practices that are fundamentally religious and colonial in sensibility. There is, therefore, an inevitable correlation between the study of history, theological language, and political practice. This morning, we embark on a series of roundtable discussions that illuminate the complex narratives that gave birth to our sense of identities and nationhood. In commemorating 500 years of Christianity, we not only take account of our history, but more importantly, seek to critically and creatively reimagine theological language in ways that deepen and expand our understanding of what it means to be a, quote, Filipino Christian today. For our guests and for our viewers, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box or Q&A button via Zoom or through the comment section on the FB Live page. And so we proceed to the roundtable proper, and with that, I pass on this conversation to Dr. Jean Peraculio, full professor in the Philosophy Department of the La Salle University. Dr. Jean.
Thank you, Dr. Mike. Good morning, It is my honor and pleasure to moderate this path-breaking roundtable discussion on gender, feminism, and LGBTQI encounters. Our first speaker is Mr. Percy Intalan. Mr. Percy Intalan is a director, producer, writer who has worked at the Walt Disney Company, at GMA Network Inc., and at TV5 Philippines. He has won awards as producer, director, writer, editor, and sound designer. He produced the popular YouTube and Netflix series Cane Boys and has directed full-length features such as Unforgettable, Distance, Born Beautiful, My Fairy Tale Love Story, and Dimension. He produced award-winning films such as Wakaw, Barber's Tales, and Shadow Behind the Moon, and box office hits such as The Panty Sisters, Ang Dalawang Mrs. Reyes, and Die Beautiful. Mr. Intalan is the president of the Idea First Company, a content creation company, and has to date produced over 24 films partnering with major studios. Friends, let us welcome Mr. Percy Intalan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Percy Intalan. I will start with the disclaimer. I am not a theologian. I'm also not in the academe, but I am a filmmaker. I'm a director. I'm a producer. I'm a storyteller. So this morning, I want to start by just talking about a story, my story. And as you saw, I think earlier, my talk is entitled Finding Percy. It sounds very egotistic, but to be honest, it is inspired by Finding Dory and Finding Nemo, because when Mike asked me what the theme of my talk would be, it is finding identity. So I just want to I guess highlight the fact that I grew up in the context of religion and media, and I visualize that as being, in a net, in an ocean or in a sea, where you're struggling to free yourself from the net and trying to get out into the sea. But when you do get out into the sea, there are all these currents that push and pull you. And so you really do have to struggle to swim in the direction that you so choose. So I'd say that that's the story of my life. I'm a proud gay man and a proud Catholic. And I think for a lot of people, those are two polar opposites. But it's a struggle to finally find peace in being both. I grew up in a conservative family. I grew up in an all-boys school. I grew up in the 1970s. So yes, I am also a proud gay old man. But when I was growing up, the notion of identity, ultimately, I think, is rooted by the fact that we were taught that it all started with Adam and Eve. So yes, I dare say I do blame Adam and Eve for everything, because ultimately that's the simplest way of defining who a person is. Where you're a male, you're Adam; you're a female, you're Eve. And when you define it that way, then it goes down to what's your purpose in life. It is really to procreate, right? So it's how I was taught. It's how I grew up. And as I was growing up, I was exposed to different films, different TV shows where you see, male and female characters, and anybody who was different from that would more often than not be the comic relief. So usually the gay character is a flamboyant character, especially in the 70s, who would literally trip over himself and do slapstick comedy. People would laugh. People would laugh at the fact that the guy wants to dress like a girl. And it was a funny thing. And we were conditioned that way. And I think, again, it is rooted by the fact that, because you're neither Adam or Eve, so it must be an abomination. Um, so I remember when I was young, I was playing in the streets. I was 7 years old, and I was playing with the boys and girls in our neighborhood. And there was this boy who was playing as role playing as Wonder Woman. And he was fascinating because he was twirling about. He was very flamboyant. He had his magic lasso, and it was fun. The elders in our community, they did not necessarily say I couldn't play with that boy, but they made me feel that I shouldn't play with that boy because he was different, you know. So you grew up in an environment like that, and at the same time, you grew up in a religion that keeps, saying that you should do the right thing, and ingrained in you that the right thing is to act like a normal heterosexual person, right? And again, it goes down to family. The goal is to procreate, Adam, Eve, procreation. So cut to the 1980s when teenagers like me were starting to find our identity. In the 1980s, identity was a big thing, and we had rock stars who were androgynous. You had Boy George and the Culture Club. You had Annie Lennox and Eurythmics. You had even David Bowie's and Elton John's who came from the 1970s. And there was this sense of, pride in being who you are. But at the same time, you still had that net, right? Because I remember we had a film then called Jack and Jill. It was a big hit. Jack and Jill, I think it's Mars Ravelo. And it was a remake of a 1950s film that was also a big hit. So this one starred Sharon Cuneta and Herbert Bautista. It was very fun. I really enjoyed watching it. But it's about siblings where the girl wanted to be a guy and the guy wanted to be a girl. And that was the source of the humor. In fact, the theme song, which was very catchy, had the line, "We are Jack and Jill. Saan ba nagkamali ang aming mga magulang? Where did our parents go wrong?" And at that time, it was just fun. It was just funny. But now looking back, it's like, wow, that's what we were exposed to. So in the end of that movie, Jack miraculously finds a guy and gets married. And Jill miraculously decides to be a guy and is surrounded by a lot of girls. There was, on the other end of the spectrum, a lesbian film, a landmark film called T-Bird Ataco. And it starred Nora Honor and Vilma Santos. And Nora Honor played the lawyer, and Vilma Santos played, I think she was a call girl or something. But anyway, there was a case and they were together and there was a relationship. And it was quite groundbreaking because you've got these two big stars in a film that has this theme, and it was written by a member of the LGBTQ community. But unfortunately, the script was rewritten because the producers didn't want it to end the way it was going to end. So again, miraculously, both women wound up with men at the end of it, and they were living happily ever after. So that's the thing. We were taught that happily ever after only comes for the heterosexual characters. The gay characters are always either clowns or pathetic, tragic characters. They would not find love. They would have a life of misery. They would be in the background. They would be walking in the distance, sadly. Or, later they would sadly die of AIDS, because that's the other fate that befell the gay and lesbian characters. Heaven forbid that we go beyond that and go into bisexual characters or transgender characters or anything else that boggles the normal mind. But that was what we grew up in. And in the 90s, you've got films like Philadelphia, which was, again, quite a groundbreaking film. You've got films like Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar. And we were introduced to, drag, not necessarily transgender, but drag, guys dressing as girls. But now it's normalized in a way, but it's still fun. It's still kind of comic. So that was also the time when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was coming out. You know, you just simply don't talk about your sexuality, and people just simply do not ask. And everybody was quiet and at peace if, you know, if nobody just talks about it. So that's the 90s. And meanwhile, our films still kept going on. We still had the gay characters every now and then. We still had slapstick comedies based on, you know, gay situations. And then in the 2000s, there was a phenomenon that came out here in the Philippines where a comedian named Vice Ganda started rocketing into fame. And say what you will about Vice Ganda, I actually hold Vice in high respect because Vice was able to carve an audience based on who he was. And the thing is, it was starting to become unapologetic from becoming the clown that people ridiculed. Vice represented the clown that was making fun of other people. So again, say what you will. There are people there. It's actually quite polarizing, his films, but there was definitely power there. There was a power dynamic that was starting to shift. At this time in the 2000s, you've got films like Pagdadalaga ni Maximo Oliveros by Oreo Salito. And it was what kicked off Cinemalaya. It was one of the first movies in Cinemalaya. And it was, again, groundbreaking because it tackled gay themes from a coming of age point of view, and it ushered in a new wave of LGBTQ stories. Awareness was starting to grow. At that time, my partner and I, June Robles Lanas, was my partner, and we started producing films. So by the year 2012, we came out with Buakaw. Buakaw was a script written by June way back, and it only had its time to be produced when Cinemalaya was already in full bloom. Buakaw is about an aging gay man, an old gay man played by Eddie Garcia. And he actually was not yet coming to terms with himself. So it's about coming out to who he is at a later age and accepting who he is. So it opened a lot of doors for us. Buakaw actually became the Philippines' entry to the Oscars that year. Unfortunately, we didn't make it, but it was featured in New York Film Festival. It played in Cannes, in Toronto. It played in Tokyo. It played in many festivals. But what's important is that not only were we bringing Philippine cinema out in the world, we were talking about an LGBTQ character, and people were starting to understand the spectrum of LGBTQ life in the Philippines. Because in Buakaw, you had an Eddie Garcia, but you also had a Soxy Topacio, who was very flamboyant. You had a Joey Paras, who was also very flamboyant, but they represented three different types of gay characters. Later, we got married in 2013. June and I, we got married in New York. It was such a big thing. It made the news because I guess we were the first gay marriage in showbiz. And then the year later, 2014, we were in New York, and unfortunately, the news broke out about Jennifer Laude. Jennifer Laude, if you remember, is a transgender woman who was killed by a U.S. serviceman. And it was such a big deal because the comments on social media were so polarizing. Some of them were sympathizing actually with the serviceman because he was deceived. They assumed that Jennifer deceived the serviceman, and that's why Jennifer deserved to be killed, so they say. It enraged us so much that it opened the doors for us to brainstorm, and Die Beautiful came out of that brainstorming. June decided that he wanted a story about a transgender woman, but this time told from the perspective of death, but not because somebody was killed, but from the perspective where in death, you celebrate a life. It's the irony of death and life in the Philippines, right? So we created that. We thought we had a great idea. We pitched it in Hong Kong. We couldn't find a producer. So we had to shelve that project. Meanwhile, in 2016, we had an opportunity to create another gay-themed, that was the term then, gay-themed film called Bakit Lahat ng Gwapo May Boyfriend? Why do all the handsome men have boyfriends? It starred Ann Curtis and Dennis Trillo. It had Paolo Ballesteros, and it was being produced at the time that Star Cinema was producing another gay-themed movie called The Third Party, starring Angel Locsin, Zanja Marudo, and Sam Milby. So it was quite a breakthrough that there were two big studios, Vivo Films and Star Cinema, that were making these stories, right? But they weren't really, I wouldn't say breaking through, because they were still told from the straight perspective. Ironically, at that time, Paolo Ballesteros became available, and the MMFF wanted to overhaul its lineup. And so we finally had an opportunity to produce Die Beautiful alongside these two films. Lo and behold, it was Die Beautiful that became the big hit. It was actually the #1 film of the MMFF, of the Metro Manila Film Festival. It won awards in Tokyo. It made Paolo Ballesteros a big star. And what we became quite proud of was the fact that it told a transgender woman's story and the struggles. It tackled issues like, actually even being gang raped, and the question of, did I like that? Did I want that? Did I have that coming to me? It tackled the question of a transgender woman having a child and taking care of a child, and the issues of identity. Later, we realized that we had more successes being true to who we are than trying to conform to what was quote unquote normal and expected in Philippine media. So we started breaking the mold away from the gay characters being the ridiculed ones, being the clowns, to making them empowered three-dimensional characters. So our next project was Ang Dalawang Mrs. Reyes, because we were asked to do a more mainstream film. And Ang Dalawang Mrs. Reyes was also a big hit. It was about two women who had to come to terms with the fact that their husbands left them for, to be with each other. So they were trying to break up this gay couple, and they started to learn what it was like and what the struggle was like for a gay couple, right? So from the lens of a straight character, we were able to talk about the LGBTQ struggle. Then we made Born Beautiful, and we tackled more issues in the LGBTQ spectrum, including polyamory. We even tackled HIV and the realities of it. And after that, we did Panty Sisters. And Panty Sisters, lo and behold, was an even bigger hit because it talked about family. What we challenged ourselves was, okay, we will dare the audience to accept the fact that being LGBTQ does not mean being anti-family. It is about family values. I mean, us Filipinos, usually it's the LGBTQ family member that takes care of the family, the elders in the family. So we did that, and it was a big success. During the pandemic, we created Game Boys, and Game Boys talked about young love, in the LGBTQ spectrum. On the other side, we also did a film called Distance. It was about a woman who left her family to be with her lesbian partner. And she was a lesbian, but when her partner died, it was her family that welcomed her back, and she was trying to fit in again in a family that was actually welcoming her, but it was her that could not accept being part of that family again. So we were tackling the not really self-hate, but the issue of self-acceptance. Because even when everybody around you accepts who you are, you yourself, I guess, part of, again, being taught about Adam and Eve, you have this notion that you cannot be accepted, you cannot be loved, but even if you can. So, cut a long story short, I think what happened was we were able to find who we are against the grain. So we were able to break free from the net that pretty much dictates who our identity should be. we were able to even swim against the tide, so to speak, on what society expected and was conditioned to expect. But it wasn't an easy. It wasn't an easy journey. I mean, it took us all of these years. It took me almost 50 years now to get to where I am. And yet there's so much ground to break. We are now in an age where sexual fluidity is actually a norm, like it or not. And identity is not connected to sexuality. It's not necessarily connected to sexuality. And so our next film, we're actually developing a film where we have a flamboyant, effeminate character with flamboyant, effeminate friends living with a gay father, and a community that pretty much accepts this person if he were gay. But the interesting thing is this character is not gay. He is effeminate, but he is straight. And so we're dealing with the biases where society cannot accept that this effeminate character is about to woo a girl. But at the same time, even the LGBTQ community is trying to convince this person that, no, you should come out. You're just in the closet. But that person is not. So how do we deal with that? And so I'm excited about that. That's a film that we're developing now. And we already, last night, were able to talk to the guy who will star in it. And we're excited to have him in that role. So I guess that's where I want to end my talk, is that in media, please be patient with us. We are trying to reflect the changes in society, the changes in gender identity and sexual orientation, and trying to fight for those rights. But at the same time, we are trying to connect it to an audience that really needs to hear this message and really needs to know these stories and understand that it is a spectrum. You cannot just define it as one or the other, in the same way that you cannot define a person as Adam or Eve. So I guess that's the end of my story. It's still a continuing story to be continued. And I hope that the stories we tell will inspire more of you, especially the students, and especially because a lot of you are storytellers too, and some of you may even want to be filmmakers, to tell stories such as this, because it is the variety, the diversity in the human experience that breaks us free from this net and lets us all swim against the tide, because we get to do it on our own terms, in our own pace, with our own identity, on our own journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Percy. That was a wonderful, how do you call that? The navigation, a journey actually, of the history of the Filipino LGBTQI stories using media and popular culture. And from the chat, some people are saying they could actually feel very nostalgic about the films that you mentioned. And we really are excited about your next projects. And we really love what you use here as an imagery, right? Either a net or an ocean. And you have two choices. Either you will just remain, on a standstill, right? In a way, accepting of your reality, or you can swim against the tide, right? And to be able to tell your stories, because at the end of the day, representation matters. And by really going through the hyper specific experiences of the Filipino LGBTQI members of our society, you really spotlight and highlight their existence. So that's why representation matters. So thank you very much.
Thank you
for that. So our next speaker is practically a legend in the LGBTQI theories. And because he has provided a lot of us as scholars in gender and feminism, the works to be able to continue his scholarship. Dr. Neil Garcia teaches creative writing and comparative literature at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he serves as director of the University Press and a fellow for poetry in the Institute of Creative Writing. He is the author of numerous poetry collections and works in literary and cultural criticism. Between 1994 and 2014, he co-edited the famous Ladlad series of Philippine K writing. Other important anthologies that he edited are Aura, The Gay Theme in Philippine Fiction in English in 2012, Bright Sign, Bright Age, Critical Essays in Philippine Studies in 2017, Busilak, The New LGBTQ Poetry from the Philippines, and Lamios, The New LGBTQ Fiction from the Philippines. He was the lead academic investigator for the Philippines of Project Global Grace, Global Gender and Culture of Equality, a worldwide research and arts consortium sponsored by the Research Councils of the United Kingdom and Goldsmiths University of London, which concluded its operations in December of 2021. He is currently at work on Likha, his seventh poetry book and burden of the oral essays. Friends, let us welcome Dr. Neil Garcia.
Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Mahaba po ang aking papel, hindi ko siya babasahin ng buo, subalit nabigay ko na po ang kopya nito sa aking mga fellow panelists. So sana po sa diskusyon may konteksto na para sa kanila yung aking sasabihin. As we know in our country, bamboo as an image has mythic undertones. In a famous creation story, comparable versions of which may be found all over our archipelago, it was from this primeval reed that the first man and woman emerged after it had been cleft in two by the beak of a fantastic bird. As some of us may remember, this story has been invoked by local feminists as an enabling myth, an antidote to the Judeo-Christian account of creation, which legitimizes the masculinist oppression of women because Eve merely comes out of Adam's side, implying that Eve is Adam's property. By contrast, in the story of the bamboo, man and woman are practically twins and thereby equals, born into creation at the same instance, children of the same vegetal source. This last point is important, for instead of the violent dualism between nature and humanity, a dualism ontologized to the point of despair by Judeo-Christianity, which has deemed nature, ergo the body and its appetites, as fallen, and needing redemption through the sublimating rituals of religion, this mythology intuits and posits a continuity between the human and the worldly, and between the worldly and the divine. Filipino cosmogonies understand gender difference as being underpinned by an elemental unity, and therefore as complementary rather than hierarchical, something that the native languages of the Philippines, all predominantly gender unitarian, themselves also reveal. This myth provides me now the occasion to ponder the question of locating Christianity in our colonial past and decolonizing present, particularly as prismed through the question of gender. Crucial to understanding the difference that colonialism has made in the lives of its subjects across the world is the idea and reality of translation, which is commonly interlingual, meaning across languages, for example, Spanish and English, and our plenitude of local languages, but also intersemiotic, meaning across sign systems, which in our case would be our immemorial orality on one hand and our uneven and modern literacy on the other. That there is no seamless or complete translation or conversion across languages and signifying frames is something that we who have been working in this area of study already clearly understand. In many ways, post-colonial resistance, decoloniality, is nothing if not the recognition of this fact, of the dialogic nature of colonial power, of colonial authorities' ever-frustrated need to be translated in order to be recognized and acknowledged by its subjects, and of the syncretism or hybridity that necessarily ensues out of the project of conversion/translation, which is to say, out of the representational and therefore cultural project of colonialism itself. To be more specific, in the interest of our topic for today, the question of translation bids us to remember how the imposition of religious dogma and sexological thinking, courtesy of the Spanish and American dispensations, did not completely displace nor supplant existing understandings of the mysterious and the divine and of their relationship to the bodily or the sexual, even as the intervening centuries did admittedly change, which is to say, did translate these indigenous practices and beliefs into new and hybrid forms. Recognizing the truth of this translational difference, this non-equivalence between source and target, is not necessarily an easy or self-evident task, however. We already know that equivalence is an illusion that any work of translation may either flag or dissimulate. In the former case, the target text language ends up becoming self-ironic or foreignized, while in the latter it is made uniform or domesticated. Generally speaking, the practice of the scholars of our colonial and post-colonial histories and cultures, writing primarily in English, has been characterized by a mostly domesticizing form of translation, if these scholars have even acknowledged that they have been translating ideas and realities to begin with. On the other hand, the mediation of knowledges occurs everywhere in our society, and scholarship, which is analytical in its orientation, need not bear the brunt of our attention in this regard. There are, of course, the normative apparatuses. For example, religious institutions, which are typically purveyors of education and moral instruction. Being self-conscious that they are in the business of translating is generally not the case with these institutions, which do not typically analyze, but rather promulgate and enforce discourses. To wit, it's simply not in the interest of our church authorities to acknowledge, let alone endorse or celebrate, the translatedness, hence the distortion of the faith as it has been received and as it is being practiced by our people. A schism with the Roman magisterium lies this way, even as it's true that this highest dogma-setting structure of the Catholic Church has, since the Second Vatican Council, been grudgingly giving tokenistic room for what it calls folk expressions among the multicultural faithful spread across the globalized world, for example, in the area of liturgical music. And yet, translationality, which is to say hybridity, is indeed how things mostly are in our post-colonial society, in which residual animus and ancestral beliefs stubbornly inform and stimulate the devotional life of many Filipinos. Intoning the words of the Ama Namin, Pater Noster, our understanding of will as loob takes it not so much as absolute and inexorable as personally effective and negotiable. Even as in our everyday lives, our adherence to folk ways of familialism and situational or non-categorical thinking demonstrate yet again the persistence of orality psychodynamics despite or precisely because of the tenuous presence of textuality in our lives. Think of the national cults of the Santo Niño and how they reveal our people's preference for the image of a god who is docile and malleable, a pink-cheeked, cherubic, arguably effeminate child deity who is amenable and bespoke to its devotees, arrayed and attired in the manner that they are. The Santo Niño fiesta in Tondo is particularly instructive here. The feast day procession that starts in the afternoon and ends toward midnight sees a cornucopia of assorted images of the Holy Child perched on colorfully bedecked carrozas and practically dressed like dolls, representing the interests and the likenesses of the specific segments of the local populations bearing them aloft. In all the times I've participated in this Maringal na procession, I've seen Santo Niños dressed as a fireman, a jerseyed basketball player, a fisherman, a street sweeper or metro aide, a policeman, a muscle shirt-wearing bodybuilder, even as what appeared to be a fabulously coiffed and feather boa-wearing Moulin Rouge dancer. These last two images were sponsored by the Association of Tondo's gym owners and beauticians, respectively. In other words, across the 5 centuries, the mythological system of Christianity has needed to dialogue with and in the process become translated by and through the mythological systems of our archipelago, in order to become locally viable and take root. This translation hasn't been just across languages, but also across the oral scriptural divide, and its resultant deformations, indigenizations, bear these dynamics out. Again, think of the Tagalog sing-song Pasyon and how it nativizes the gospel narratives to such a powerful degree that it has effectively subsumed into itself the epic energies of the Tagalog communities whose indigenous heroic tales it has come to eclipse. Nonetheless, because Christianity and our own folklore are both forms of mythology in which resonant imagery and powerful narrative play crucial roles, their similarity lies inevitably in their figurative nature. To be specific, what this means is that their stories, wondrously diverse as they are, do gesture toward and express comparable yearnings for transcendence. Despite the fact that they are products of vastly disparate histories and cultures, this desire for transcendence, for the spiritual, is arguably their foremost contact zone, their common tenor, even as their metaphorical vehicles as culturally specific fictions have of course been appreciably divergent. This translational state of affairs may be evidenced in gender as well, as it is presently biomedically defined and heteronormatively organized. Even in our country, gender is a regulatory discourse in which bodies are identified and expected to identify with and perform social roles according to the binary model of masculinity and femininity, grounded in assigned birth sex, believed to be self-evident, factual, and immutable. Kasarian, the Filipino term for gender, with the root sari, arguably performs this categorizing procedure as well, specifying the tao, person, into lalaki, man, or babae, woman. However, this recognition of duality is challenged by its absence in the pronominal system of any of our country's 180 languages on one hand, and on the other, by the existence of indigenous words spread across the archipelago for gender crossers, similar to contemporary trans identities, except they are not premised on, primarily because they chronologically and conceptually predate the anatomical dimorphism of the biomedical discourse within which these trans, as opposed to cis identities, have come to exist in the modern West. In fact, up to now, bakla and their counterparts across the archipelago, agi, bayot, bantut, binabae, etc., continue to evince a predominantly gender concept that bespeaks a kind of psychospiritual depth of being woman-hearted or having a feminine kalooban on one hand, and in terms of sexual desire, of being masculine-fixated, otherwise described in the literature as being slavishly fascinated with the real man or tunay na lalaki on the other. Held in esteem during pre-colonial times, these traditional identities have, however, been progressively sexologized and demeaned across the colonial and post-colonial centuries, and are now the bearers of the stigma of the pathologizing discourse of homosexuality. Nonetheless, a deconstructive possibility is inherent in sari itself, which can pertain to notions of type, variety, or kind that are not even remotely related to genitality on one hand, and on the other, when repeated, reveals a principle of plenitude and diversity, sari-sari, that conceptually proliferates and pluralizes personhood, embodiment, or even being in general, thus challenging binaristic thinking itself. These derivations from the word sari enable kasarian to engender non-dualistic and polyvalent possibilities both on the level of gendered personhood and expression and the sexual desires that attend them. A theme I therefore see and would like to recognize but not necessarily elaborate on today, I have no time, is the translated and therefore problematic situation of dualistic logic, central to both Christianity and the secular discourses of Western modernity in our cultures, in which the residual energies of the unifying vision of our pre-colonial orality persists. In my keynote for the first National Queer Studies Conference, sponsored by the Center for Gender and Women's Studies of the UP a year ago, I discussed the insights of non-duality that may be found in great measure in the ancient epic corpus, the oral Sugidanon of the Panay Bukidnon people. In these chanted epic cycles, oppositions are recognized and yet finally superseded in the tales of beautiful sorceresses transforming themselves into intrepid datus in order to defend their own dignity, of a cave-dwelling villainess who is really a selfless and benevolent mother, of a gallant hero who cravenly steals a she-monster's golden pubic hair, and of vanquished usurpers becoming revealed as distant relatives and resurrected by the almighty grandmother goddess for the sake of harmony and peace. At the end of my keynote, I invited the scholars working in Philippine queer studies to precisely tap into our country's abundant reserve of oral and folk energies, still vibrant in our many native languages and lore, whose reality and force remain mostly spoken rather than written, and therefore continue to be uncodified and bracingly vital. In that keynote, I call this task, in our case, a Philippine-specific form of queering the queer. So basically, I'm not going to read anymore kasi wala nang time. I say in that keynote that queer as a word itself contains deconstructive possibilities, no? Because it's also a verb. So you queer, right? We are queering the word queer because we are translating it in our own realities here. And it means things that are very different from what it means, let's say, in America or elsewhere, where the word queer may also be found. So I end. We decolonize queer, we decolonize gender itself by acknowledging and inquiring into the translational exchange between modern binaries of sex and sexuality and traditional notions of gendered expression and embodiment, which these binaries have never exhausted nor entirely superseded or replaced in the post-colonial space. I will end now with an image of something. I would like to flash it. Is it possible to share my screen?
You should be able to, Dr. Garcia.
Okay. Oh. Only hosted. Anyway, no more time. This is the image of two bulol figures, no, that were carved in the Cordillera sometime in the 19th century. And my annotation to that is, this is male and female bulol. The image is of two Ifugao bulol figures, male and female rice deities, carved anonymously in the Cordillera sometime in the 1800s. Notice how formally synchronous and complementary they are, their duality recognized yet transfigured, pared down and sublimed humbly away. You hardly know who is male and female because their distinctions are not highlighted. They are sublimed away. No? So the vision is unity rather than duality. I'll end with my text. While colonialism and its hierarchies are, even if largely as translations, already with us, while our linguistic and cultural worlds are becoming more and more layered and mixed, and while we all must live in our own time, our hope is that we may still be able to hold on to and be inspired by what tenaciously endures about our identities as post-colonial subjects, which our many spoken languages still thankfully allow us to remember, even as our embodied differences constitute everyday truths about who we are, as our ancestors understood all too clearly. Underlying these truths, superseding these differences, is the inner oneness of our common humanity, which is also our common divinity. That's it. I had to rush through it. I'm really sorry, but I hope we can have a good discussion after. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia. You still have about 2 minutes, by the way. Anyway, so we can have more of you during the...
May I? Ay, wala. I cannot share my screen eh.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah. There's
right.
an exhibit that's interesting. Yeah. And maybe later we can talk about that.
Okay, thank you very much. And yes, no, I fully agree with what you said, that translation, as traitor, is an act of violence, right? But on the other hand, it also allows for hybridity to come in. And as a result of that, we can have some form of resistance, a post-colonial resistance. So again, that the duality, and I'm thinking about the figure of Mercury, of both, a healer and at the same time a deliverer of poison. So to speak.
Yes. But I think what I'm saying is that our Christianity is translational, meaning that the received texts, the received practices, the dogma were transformed
Right.
through translation into our own mythological world. So my take is that Christianity is a mythological system, and we had our own mythological systems here. And in order for this new system to compete or even be viable, it had to dialogue with the systems here. And in dialoguing, it became appropriated and transformed. So my example would be the way we understand divine will. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you translate that idea of will, which in the original, in the biblical sense, should be mandate or commandment, right? The commandment, your will be done. You use the word loob. Loob is not commandment. Loob is not even just volition. It is a whole in inner world. Loob is more emotional than anything. It's full of affect. Like, masama ang loob ko, mabigat ang loob ko, o maganda ang loob, magaan ang loob. So actually, loob is full of the experiential world of the person. And in a sense, it's interpretable, meaning it's inhabitable. And so when you say, sundin ang loob ng Diyos, sinasabi mo, pwede kong pakiusapan yung loob na yon. Kasi hindi siya commandment. It is an inner experience. And it's relatable. So, negotiable siya in a way. Kaya siguro ang dami-dami nating mga Kristiyano, mga Katoliko kunwari, na mga kung ano-anong kabulstugan ng pinagagagawa. Kasi puro nini-negotiate na yung kalooban ng Diyos, di ba? Hindi ko alam. I think it's tama ka, pharmaco, no? It's remedy and poison at the same time. Translation, I'm sorry, but some of these things it may have been better if we actually understood it as commandment.
Thank you for those powerful messages. We will get back to you, Dr. Neil, later on. Thank you. Now we have our third speaker, the last, but certainly not least. So it is our honor to have Dr. Lisette Tapia Raquel with us. So Reverend Dr. Lisette Raquel is Associate Professor at Union Theological Seminary, Philippines, where she has been teaching Christian and feminist theology and Christian ethics for over a decade. She is the director of Union's Innovative Theological Education Program, or ITED. Dr. Tapia Raquel also convened the Center for Women, Youth, and Children, and later the Center for Gender and Sexuality. She has lectured on women and youth empowerment for the Christian Conference of Asia, World Student Christian Federation, World Council of Churches, and others. She is a member of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, or ITWOT, the Association of Women in Theology, AWIT, and the Society of Asian Biblical Studies, or SAPS. An ordained deacon of the United Methodist Church, Dr. Tapia Raquel is a feminist liberation theologian, often invited to speak on social justice, LGBTQI rights, and women and youth empowerment. She earned a PhD from Yonsei University, South Korea, and she also has a Master of Theology degree from the Southeast Asia Graduate School of Theology, a Master of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary, Philippines, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Tourism Management from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. First, let us welcome Dr. Lisette.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm truly honored to be in this panel. Starstruck ako sa aking mga co-panelists. No? I'm the only theologian in this group, sabi nila, but to be honest, I'm mostly thought of as a heretic in my church. No? So let me share my screen. You're able to see that?
Yes, Doc.
Yes, okay. This paper is tentatively titled From Demonization and Disincarnation to Babaylan Feminist Multiplicity. A woman and a man meet at a well and they have a long conversation. The man says, "Give me a drink. If you knew me, you would have asked me instead and I would have given you living water." Then he changes topic and says, "Go call your husband and come back. You have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." And then he says, "I am the Messiah." This is a conversation between Jesus and a Samaritan woman in the Gospel according to John, chapter 4, and it has been traditionally understood as a story of conversion. However, reading the narrative from a post-colonial feminist perspective, scholars have critiqued how Jesus' characterization exhibits ethnic, religious, and gender superiority. Even if it was Jesus who needed the drink from the woman, at the end of the text, she wants his living water. She believes that her people worship the wrong God and she needed salvation from him. Similar conversations must have been repeated 1,000,000 times in the last 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines. In the Philippine experience, the Spanish came with the cross and the sword, and the Americans came with the Bible and the gun. The encounter between Christianity and the Filipino people was not a holy conversion. In a book on religion, gender, and sexuality in the Philippines for the period 1521 to 1685, Caroline Brewer exposes the Christianization of the natives as not a holy conversion, but a holy confrontation. The Babaylan, pre-colonial priestesses received the full attack of colonization and yes, Christianity. Before Christianity, they embodied a multiplicity in identity, a fullness in sexuality, and had agency. While the Samaritan woman was diminished because of her gender, race, and culture, the Babaylan was demonized and disincarnated. For the Spanish missionaries, the destruction of the native pagan priestesses who were instruments of the devil must be absolute to Christianize the natives. In Zeus Salazar's research on pre-colonial Philippines, the socio-economic structure was divided in 3 domains: the political, which was the sphere of the influence of the Datu, the technological, which was the field of the Panday, and the cultural, which was the realm of the Babaylan. In times of war, the Datus and the Mandirigma could not go to battle without the consent of the Babaylan. The Babaylan performed many functions in community life. She was the chief mourner of the dead, the executor of rituals, dances, and songs, offerer of sacrifices, performer of the wedding ritual, and the religious authority. She was believed to have the power to communicate with the spirits and the supernatural being, and this responsibility came as a natural course because of women's participation in the agricultural milieu. The woman was also perceived as the embodiment of nature's capability to bear fruit and originate life, in her innate ability to create life as a mother, and the guardian of the secrets of life and nature, which was beyond the grasp of men. From the Catholic worldview, a woman could never be a priest. However, what may be construed as handicaps or weaknesses have sustained and strengthened the connection of the Babaylan to the community. First, she was an integral part of the community and is therefore conscious of the needs and aspirations of the people whom she serves. Second, because a woman can only become a babaylan in her middle age, it can be presumed that she has acquired wisdom through her experiences as daughter, wife, mother, and other roles that require her to exercise her creative and nurturing potentials. She learned not from books, educational degrees, or associations, but from life itself. According to Brewer, sex and gender were not the determinants in assuming the role of a babaylan. Rather, it was the femininity. The babaylan, a woman, exhibited a celebration of life. She wore colorful ceremonial clothes, perfumed her unbound hair with oil, initiated rituals with singing, danced with rhythmic drums, and practiced secret and mysterious knowledge to facilitate life and meaning in the community. That is why when the men assumed the role of the babaylan, they dressed like women. In fact, many of them were effeminate and outside their roles as shamans, dressed and acted more like women than men. When the Spanish conquerors wrested the power from the datus, who became subjects to the King of Spain and mere implementers of Spanish decrees, and the Pandays were forced into a system where production became for profit and ownership of lands which used to be communal became private, mostly owned by religious orders. This was consequently followed by the degradation of the religious influence and authority of the babaylans. The babaylans were divested of their role as mediator between God and humans and as guardians of folk knowledge. They were degraded and were considered herb doctors or midwives, and worst of all, witches. However, the presence of the babaylans was not entirely expunged. Many of them established revolutionary organizations which became messianic groups. They instigated rebellion by initiating the religious and cultural revolution in their areas of influence. It can be said that the babaylans launched many uprisings against the Spanish colonizers and may have been precursors of the women who joined the Katipunan. Finally, since many tribes and cultural communities remained unconquered by the colonizers, the babaylans continued in their functions. In some areas like the Ifugao in the Cordilleras, where Christianity had already been established, the presence of male Roman Catholic priests likewise influenced the rise of male babaylans. This may also be attributed to the displacement of men from their traditional roles as political and economic leaders. According to Reynaldo Eleto, Hermano Pule was considered a Catalonan, while Dagohoy was considered a babaylan. Both were revolutionaries. The demonization of the babaylan was systematic and was both a political and missionary agenda. The popularity of the Aswang legends were remarkable in lowland Christian communities, particularly in the Visayan and Bicol regions, which were the first areas of mission during the Spanish conquest. One of the most common stories describes the Aswang sucking the fetus with her tubular tongue or slashing a pregnant woman's belly to obtain the infant. This ghastly image is a reversal of the babaylan's role as healer and midwife. The account of the Aswang's mambo-tambo dance before she kills her prey can be interpreted as mocking the babaylan's sword dance before she spears the sacrificial animal in some rituals. The night departure of the Aswang can also be a derision for the babaylan's trance journey for spiritual powers. Another inversion which strongly offends the babaylan's image is on the Filipino value of family solidarity and community responsibility. In the legend, the Aswang has to cannibalize one of her family members as an initiation rite to complete her transformation as a witch. She shuns participation in the community life and prefers to live a secluded and lonely existence. To contain or repel the Aswang's power, Catholic elements had to be used. For example, sprinkling of the holy water, exposing blessed palms or crucifixes, burning incense, and praying. To capture the Aswang, one should use a priest's belt around her body to deprive her of power. Finally, the Spanish chronicles give an account of how the Spanish friars conspired and referred to the Babaylan-led rituals as abusos, indicting them for sexual license and alcoholic indulgence, the two greatest sins. The shamans were denounced as primitive, unchaste women, practitioners of a fraudulent religion, and above all, priestesses of the devils. Their idols and sacred groves were burned. They were subjected to sermons, coerced to confessions, and forced to wear Agnus Dei scapulars. In the Spanish chronicles, there were no physical punishments or tortures on the Babaylans recorded. However, the Spanish priests did punish female natives with beatings of as much as 50 lashes for sexual excesses and infractions such as going topless. On the rest of the community, the priests counter the indigenous religion by the intensification of masses and processions and destruction of all signs of animist faith. The instruments of Christianization systematically dehumanized and disincarnated the women natives. I will only mention a few here. Mary, as the Virgin Mother, provided awe-inspiring model of purity. Mary's submissive, passive, and humble attributes were glorified, while her strong and liberating statement in the Magnificat was omitted. That was problematic then and now. The images of the suffering Christ and Christ the Conqueror are contradictory when scrutinized, but it has justified the political agenda of Spain. It provided the foundation for the conquerors to subjugate the natives and for the colonized to submit to their oppressors. In the colonizers' theological discourse, Jesus as male not only substantiated an all-male priesthood, it also validated patriarchy and hierarchy where the women are at the bottom. Perhaps in the Catholic faith and ritual, the confessional has the most damaging effect on women. While they are passive recipients of abusive sermons that construct them as the curse on humanity by being inherently sinful, in the act of confession, they are active participants in their own denigration, particularly in the 9th commandment, where the woman is deemed the subject of man's sinfulness. The man can discipline himself not to sin and can seek repentance to cleanse his spirit, but the woman, as the object of sin because of her form, cannot escape from the lust of a man, which is blamed on her. Furthermore, in the relationship of the priest as confessor and the female native as confessant, the dynamics of power place the native woman in a very vulnerable position. She was subjected to a lot of sexual abuse and harassment. The missionaries divided women in two categories, the virgin and the whore. A catechism material written in Tagalog between 1582 and 1591 suggested that virginity was a human quality and its absence was indicative of an animal quality more appropriate to pigs than human beings. Virginity, or uncorrupted sexual and spiritual purity, was such an alien concept to Filipinos that there was no specific word in any of the Philippine languages to correspond to it. The Spanish word virgen was assimilated into the Tagalog and Visayan languages as birhen. Subsequently, the Spanish signifier for whore or prostitute, puta, was likewise absorbed. The denigration of the Babaylan in Spanish colonial times was therefore not just an attack on the native priestesses, but an attack on the epitome and the identity of the native woman. Now she is called a Filipina, a name given to her by her colonizers. Just as her name is given by people not her own, her identity has likewise been imposed on her by the same. I think these are all transgressions against women, and the church must be held accountable. This research is in my unpublished Master of Divinity thesis, The Church's Violence Against Women, written in 2005. For me, it was a confession as a woman of the church and an exorcism from a colonizing and patriarchal Christianity. Yet I think that colonizing and patriarchal, yes, I think that This kind of Christianity is some kind of demon possession that dehumanizes, enslaves, and is embedded in many Christian institutions and traditions. In 2020, my dissertation entitled The Assumption of Desire Toward a Feminist Theology of Incarnation to honor a multiplicity of women's identity, sexuality, and agency. Here, I articulate the Babaylan as a model of feminist incarnation and multiplicity. This Babaylan feminist multiplicity is rooted in two theological and philosophical understandings. Divine multiplicity provides a posture of fluidity in our understanding of the divine, in the refusal to absolutize and universalize our images and symbols of divinity. Humanity is also liberated to allow that which is divine to flow into our lives, reveal God's self, and relate to us wherever and whoever we are. It is embracing the promise that we are created in the image of God, and in turn, affirming the same for all other human beings and creatures we meet. In divine multiplicity, perhaps we can finally trust in the God who welcomes us all. Unlimited incarnation as the potential enfleshment and embodiment of divinity in our multiple bodies is grounded on the full humanity of Jesus Christ. That believing in the full humanity and full divinity that is in Christ, who is the first among many, each of us can be the locus of incarnation and divine revelation. Jurgen Moltmann said it quite simply: without that being flesh of Christ, there would be no Christian divinity, because it is in the flesh, in the body, that God is with us. Unlimited incarnation empowers us as flesh and bodies to act in the transformation of the world. It opens us to encounter and welcome others who are different from us, compels us to give space and listen to those in the margins, and energizes us to reach out to others in life-affirming relations. Finally, unlimited incarnation sanctions us to love who we are and are becoming, liberates us to love our bodies and love whoever we want to love, and empowers us to truly be in the world with courage, compassion, and commitment. In articulating Babaylan feminist multiplicity, I am honoring the Babaylan in pre-colonial times as embodiments of the divine multiplicity and feminist incarnation. But, she's not just a thing of the past. She, they are present today, following a trail of women revolutionaries like you and me, whose struggle for true liberation was not just personal, but political. 20 years ago, I encountered the Babaylan. Now I am teaching Babaylan and feminisms at Union Theological Seminary. So the Babaylan is with us even today. And as a last word, let me just say that Alexandra in the Netflix series 13 is a Babaylan. I will end here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lisette. And I was just really admiring how you were laying bare the subjugation and, as you mentioned, the violence against women through the subjugation and suppression of the Babaylan spirit that persists until now. Yet at the same time, you are also offering hope, right? Through the movements that you mentioned, and I call these movements a little, in a way, also a little bit graphic, from actually flowing from your presentation. Maybe it's because usually you hear feminists saying, "Oh, we need to reclaim, we need to either recast or something like that." But what we need is a more graphic and a more forceful word. Perhaps we need to exorcise, exercise, which is of course refers to the active expulsion of centuries-old ideological frameworks that oppress Filipino women such as sexism and misogyny. But that's just one of the acts that can be made. So thank you very much for a very inspiring talk on how that we can actually reclaim that babaylan spirit for all women and men as well. Now, at this point, may I invite all our speakers, Mr. Percy, Dr. Neil, to be with us in this conversation where you will ask each other or at least comment on each other's presentation. Yeah, Dr. Neil would like to start.
No, very interesting presentation from Lizette. No, and I think I like the way it ended, not with just nostalgia or an acknowledgement of our pre-lapsarian past. No, ironically, di ba? What the good news that should have arrived, no, with Christianity. The news that arrived was really the story of the fall of nature, no? I'm sorry, but only in Judeo-Christianity do you have that myth of the fall.
Right.
In Eastern mythologies, in Asian mythologies, nature is not fallen. Nature is divine. And our babaylan, who were so connected to nature, were channeling the divine energies from nature. And there was no discontinuity between nature, humanity, and the divine. They were all one continuous stream. And which is why it's so interesting in the story of the bamboo. I know you're saying malakas at maganda. That's just the Marcosian naming of those characters. In the actual oldest version, in the Visayas, you'll find it, the names were Sikalak and Sikabay, no? Meaning lalaki at babae. Wala silang pangalan, walang adjective attributed to them na malakas yung lalaki at maganda lang yung babae. Wala, Sikalak at Sikabay sila. Yun yung kanilang pangalan, no? They came out of a plant. And a plant is rooted in the earth. And a plant is of the earth. So it's clear, where does humanity come from? From the world. And who created the world? Where did it spring from? It sprang from the divine. So continuous siya lahat. Kawawa naman ang garden, di ba? The garden is represented by the energy of life. And what is the clearest image for that? The snake, which can shed off its skin and reincarnate and produce life again and again and become eternally alive, di ba? And the snake is the devil. And that's the beginning of it. And you know,
how wonderful is that we have Dr. Neil Garcia, who's just really beautiful, right? With words, and he has all the right images to describe what we are all thinking, right?
The incarnational view is precisely that we are divine. We are divine, and we are embodiments of the divine. And you know, that is all. What I stress probably is, I merely just mentioned it, but there is this dualistic logic that came with Judeo-Christianity that is actually foundational to modernity itself, di ba? These distinctions, the binaries, no? But our own orality, if you look at the Sugidano and the oral chanted epics of the Panay Bukidnon, if you study our folklore, if you study our mythologies, you will see that the yearning is towards transcending the duality of the existence towards the unity, right? There is an elemental unity that our ancestors understood. And the duality was simply the illusion. And the truth was the union. And I think we know that, no? Wala nga tayong pronoun na lalaki at babae. Siya is napakaganda nung siya, di ba? Kasi maski itong cellphone ko, siya. Maganda siya. Kabibili ko lang, oh. Maganda siya, oh. Di ba? Siya, everything.
Yeah, Dr. Lisette, do you want to react to Dr. Neil's?
Yeah.
Yes.
I was also I also find the Genesis creation narrative very problematic, no? Lahat sila nagsasalita, the serpent, the supposedly male, pero yung babae dun sa teksto hindi siya nagsasalita. And when she finally eats of the fruit that will give her knowledge, why is that so wrong? I would eat it again and again and fall from Eden and actually escape Eden. Who wants to stay in Eden? No. So I have in my my wall, my photo wall, a photo of Eve tying up the snake, Adam, and God, even God. And she's escaping Eden, and there is a need to escape Eden because that also is a construct, no?
Thank you, Dr. Lisette. Mr. Percy, how do you make use of that? You know, this silence. Paano ba siya magkakaroon ng boses, no, in the reimagined, let's say, in your films, and in your videos, in your writings? How can we make someone who is voiceless or silenced be an active participant of her life or her destiny?
No, you know what's interesting is that, well, first I just want to react na sobrang insightful ng talk ni Neil at Dr. Lisette. Na ina-absorb ko pa to be honest. But interesting for me na we're talking about the Genesis narrative and how problematic that is. Kasi for some reason lahat tayo nag-gravitate towards that. Na yung pag-simplify ng mga bagay actually that's not part of our faith, to be honest, diba? Inano yan create yan as an interpretation, and yet dun rooted most of our problems, diba? About identity and about the issue of sexual orientation and the demonizing of it. On your question, I think ultimately it's people don't realize kasi that in a lot of our stories, a lot of the tropes play to all of the flaws in our society, like the male dominance is still very much there. I mean, pag tinignan mo naman yung mga superhero movies, di ba? Gano'ng karami ba lalaki versus babae? At ilan ba talagang kwento ang kailangan ng babae nililigtas ng lalaki? It's always that. Yun ang default. And we even question, kasi some of our writers submit scripts, and we had one recently na yun ang question ko so bakit kailangan iligtas ng lalaki yung babae? Bakit ganun? Bakit kailangan baliktad? Or bakit sa mistress movies, nag-aaway yung dalawang babae? Bakit sila yung nag-aaway? Bakit di nila awayin yung lalaki? Diba? Kasi pareho sila niloko. And yet, in our society, that's what people want to see, the catfight between the women. It's not about the women. It's about the guy. Siya yung nanloko Diba? So, may mga ganon. So, I think that what we can do is really start empowering, changing the narratives slowly in any way we can, by empowering the female characters, the LGBTQ characters, the marginalized characters, na to be three-dimensional and to be able to fight for themselves, diba? And fight their own fights. I think that's important.
Thank you for that. Dr. Malu raises her hand. She's our biblical scholar, and she may want to ask a question or comment on the Genesis story. Dr. Malu?
Yeah, I find it really fascinating that we get back to that Genesis story. First off, we have two accounts of stories. In Genesis 1, you have the man and woman. God created them in God's likeness. And one of the new interpretation, and even from our Jewish brothers and sisters, is to say that actually we're not talking about two binary here, but you can think about this as a spectrum too, because you're talking about the man and woman in God's image, not separate. So just think about it also from the perspective of medicine, of hormones. Both of us have the male and female hormones. It's just that for some, the male or the male hormone is more dominant. So even from more current biblical interpretation, that idea of a binary is also not the it's still the predominant, but that's not the only interpretation now. The other one is that when we talk about the serpent story in Genesis, this will be in another tradition of interpretation, which would be at the time when the Jewish people were totally decimated. They were also after the Babylonians and so on. But at the same time, these are etiological stories, and these creationist stories is actually about wisdom. And it was also a warning to Solomon, who, well, we can think about it from a colonial story, power story, and so on. And it was a warning not to the woman, but for Solomon. And if we look at the text, the woman actually had a lot of activities. She looked at the fruit. She thought about it. It was like a see judge moment if you look at the text. And so she did not just take it. She actually conversed. Remember that she was not the one who was told, don't eat of the fruit. She got it only secondhand information from Adam. And it's fascinating how do we envision that particular moment? Do we think that Adam was so far away? Remember, he was just there. That's why when Eve took it, she just gave it to him. He was there all along. So I think it's really a fascinating story. And a lot of the discussion that we have about gender is really rooted in this particular story. And that's why I think it is a very important text. And when it is told in catechism and in religious studies, which does not include additional knowledge and the continuing knowledge about gender and soji, I think we are producing a lot of harm and hurt that can be, that we now have the power to correct. For our Jewish brothers and sisters, this story is not a false story. It's about wisdom. And I have talked to my Jewish friends, and they always tell me, you think that you want to go back to Eden? It's in your story. I always ask them, well, what about for you? They say, like, remember that for us, we don't need Christ. You're theologizing, it's the fall, so that Christ can redeem you. But for the Jewish people, they say, for us, it's just a story of growing up. It's a story of adulting. Because God did not leave us. He was still talking to us in Genesis 3. He was talking with Cain. He was talking all the way up to Jesus and up to now. So for them, it's not, they don't have the need to go back to Eden because God also left Eden. So that's just it. Because I find it fascinating that everything gravitates towards Genesis.
Yeah, if we think more about the Eden story, Malu is right. There are two creation stories, right? The story with Adam falling asleep and the rib being taken out of his side to become Eve, that's the second creation story. The first one is just on the first day, on the second day, on the third day. And you would think that probably that version is older. And the Eden, that Adam falling asleep with Eve and all of that, that's obviously very patriarchal. That's probably later. It came later. But I think what's clear is that Eden was the place of unity, right? Even God walked in the garden. He was walking around, you know. There was little distinction between God and the creatures because God could actually enjoy the garden too, was walking around, right? What the fruit embodied is the entry into duality. And once you eat of that consciousness of duality, once you enter that realm of thinking of binaries, you leave Eden, you leave unity behind. And the problem is, this myth is so specific to this part of the Middle East that if you leave the Fertile Crescent at around the same time, walang comparable na leaving the unity behind. It was like nature is divine. And there was no need to leave it. There was any need to leave it. But you see, in the story of the fall, it probably in the Jewish sense, in the Hebrew sense, it was necessary to have a story like that to actually account for the idea of life itself being necessarily full of suffering. Kasi what the Eden story tells you is it actually explains why the world is full of suffering. You leave the beautiful garden where you never hungered, where you never felt any pain, where there was no suffering. You leave it and you go to suffering, right? And that explained it to them. I suppose, no, the Hebrews needed that explanation. That why life is so hard. Imagine, diba, in the story of the Hebrew people, the Hebrews, they were given a land of promise, no, flowing with milk and honey. When they got there, may mga lumad na.
Yeah.
Iba-iba na, mga Canaanite, di ba? Kailangan nilang paalisin, kailangan maggera-gera, ang gulo-gulo. So, these stories are so specific to their cultural experience, to their history, no? That we have to probably, that's why I treat all of them as mythologies. Mythology for me is a language of the imagination. A myth is a powerful story that can function as a social technology to bind people in a community together, but it also gives you a manual on how to live your life, to reconcile yourself to the inevitabilities of existence. All the myths tell you how it is to be a child, to be an adolescent, to adult, and to grow old, and then reconcile yourself to death, right? Myths are like that. And these are stories. And we had our own. The Philippines, before the Spanish arrived, was so mythologically rich. Diba? Kaya pagdating ng Kristyanismo, nag-converse talaga siya kasi hindi siya magsusurvive eh. Kailangan niya mag-dialogue with the myths. All the major ethnolinguistic groups of the Philippines, right? Think of the major languages. Waray, Ilocano, Kinaraya, Hiligaynon, Cebuano, Subuanon, lahat sila may epics. May epics sila. May Ibalon, may Lamang, may mga ganyan, may Hudhud. Darangan, ang dami-dami sa Mindanao. Walang Tagalog. Bakit? Pinalitan ng pasyon. The epics were chanted in these different communities, no? Oral, walang writing, no? Orality. They were chanting the adventures of the heroes, and the adventures of the heroes reflected their own lives, right? They were chanting them. When the Passion arrived, our ancestors understood it's the same story as their own hero's journey. Doon sa epic nila. So natabunan na siya. Nawala po ang Tagalog epic, hindi mahanap ng mga historians. Saan na kami naghahagilap? Wala kaming mahanap. Kahit anong trace, wala. Sinasabi nila baka raw yung sino nga yun, yung Bernardo Carpio, baka yun daw. Hindi pwede, hindi naman siya epic hero, no? So, ibang-iba ang quality ng epic. You think about Labaw Donggon, you think about Humadapnon, you think about Ibalon, you think about Lamang. Very specific ang character ng epic hero. Walang Tagalog. Kasi si Jesucristo siya. Yun ang pasyon ang naging epiko ng mga Tagalog na displaced siya. At it took over the epic energies of the people. They were there. The energies were there. And it simply gave voice to it using this new language. The Passion Pilapil is so native. Ng mga revolution yung ginamit sa mga Kastila. Imagine mo, the story of Christianity, which is really, you think about it, defeatist, di ba? I mean, the hero goes to his death, right? Was used as an inspiration by the revolutionaries to fight.
That becomes hopeful.
This hero's journey. And they have to sacrifice, di ba? So all the myths, all the epic stories are about sacrifice. And they are all yearning for transcendence. That's why, bakit nagkalapat yung bagong mitolohiya tsaka yung luma? Kasi pare-pareho silang may thirst, may yearning for the spirit. Lahat sila. Yun ang ating union with Judeo-Christianity. I'm sorry, kahit na may story sila ng fall at pinahirapan nila yung sarili nila with all those stories, in the end, we understand the yearning for transcendence. Kaya wala naman akong problema sa Christianity. Tuwan-tuwa nga ako sa ating devotion sa Pilipinas kasi kitang-kita mo yung hybridity, yung translation na nangyari. Pwede tayo mag-play ng video kaya?
Yeah, while you're fixing that, Dr. Neil, I just want to segue to Dr. Tapia, Dr. Lisette, there's a question here about whether we can have a proper translation of sexuality and gender without the presence of colonization and even the influence of globalization. Would that be possible, this reclaiming that Dr. Neil is talking about, and also evident in your work?
Well, for me as a feminist, reclaiming is not a word I use. I would rather use becoming. No? We become. We are the product of history. We are the product of our relations. No? Kaya importante yung word na fluidity. No? Para sa akin, yung infiniteness ng possibilities is just out there. And even as I talk about Babaylan feminist multiplicity, it's not about reining it in, but rather really expanding it. No? Ang language nga na ginagamit ko ay unlimited incarnation, di ba? So it's infinite, no? I don't use reclaiming anymore. It's hard to go back. It's becoming.
Yes. Especially
na lang siguro. Gusto ko yung sinabi ng isang French feminist theorist, si Hélène Cixous. Sabi niya, the question we must ask ourselves is not who am I, but who are I? Kasi all of us in ourselves, we are many. And we do not look inside ourselves to discover who we are, but rather we look at our relations. We look at, yeah.
Does that include as well, Mr. Percy, like the multiplicities, also multiplicities of identities?
Yes, I love that. I love the who are I, because I will touch on a topic that I'm sure will open up Pandora's box. But there was a question. There's always a question of representation in the film world. No, do you cast LGBT individuals in LGBTQ roles? And my controversial answer is no. You cast the best actor for the best role, because it works both ways, diba? You do not want only straight individuals to be cast in straight roles. Okay, you do not want only LGBTQ individuals to be cast in LGBTQ roles. It's open to everybody. But there was a director, si Luca Guadagnino, I forgot how to pronounce this. The director of Call Me by Your Name actually encapsulated it well. Sabi niya, who am I? Parang I paraphrase, no? Pero what he said was, who am I to say if this person says he is straight now and will say he is gay later, or vice versa. So if I am casting this person now and I decide that not to cast him because this person says he is not gay and I only need to cast a gay person, and then 5 years from now he says he is gay, then I'm going like, was he always? But he was always gay. That's what we know, right? That's his identity. So the idea of fluidity also allows you to broaden your mind. Diba na this person, you look at this person for who this person says he is or she is or they are now. Diba? But you do not judge, because 5 minutes from now that person can decide differently and you do not have any say in that decision. Diba? So I like that. I like the who are I. Kasi yeah, really 5 minutes from now I can decide something else.
Thank you. Dr. Agnes Persol, would you like to ask a question? You're raising your hand.
May I just answer Percy a little bit, because I'm troubled?
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I think it's a question of job equity for me, Percy.
Yes.
The problem I have with the idea of casting straight actors for LGBTQ roles is that LGBTQ roles are very few. LGBTQ stories and scripts that make it to production are very, very few. And if we're not going to give the out LGBTQ actors the opportunity to play LGBTQ roles, then we are actually sending the message na parang hindi naman viable ang career na maging out ka as LGBTQ kasi mawawalan ka nga ng mga trabaho.
Yeah, pero Neil, I have to stop you there and say that the issue of job equity works both ways, diba? So I also don't want to close the doors for LGBTQ actors to be cast in straight roles, which we do. Diba? We cast LGBTQ actors in roles that are actually straight because you do not judge the person based on his or her sexuality. But you're right though, Neil, that job equity is the important key. This is a key concept here. You do not look at a person's sexuality, period. You do not look at a person's gender identity, period. You look at the person's capability. That is job equity. So if there are many people who are looking for roles that are LGBTQ and the LGBTQ individuals are really good for that role, then I would cast them.
Who are not coming out. We already know who they are.
But Neil, I will stop you there too. It is not our job to tell people to come out.
Kaya nga sana man lang dumami ang makikita nating out actors who are actually successful.
Yes,
Kasi,
and Neil, sana ang importante muna is sana dumami ang producers na magtalakas lang ng loob na gumawa ng kwento ng LGBTQ. Doon muna tayo magsimula. Simulan natin sa damihan natin yung trabaho para dumami yung job equity.
Ay nako, ako basta konting-konti na nga lang bibigay ko na sa LGBTQ actor yan.
Kasi bibigay ko sa pinakamagaling na aktor.
Ako kaya nila yan.
Hindi, kaya nila, Neil. Walang problema. Pero tandaan mo, kailangan pantay tayo. Ako, yun talaga yun. Pantay tayo. Hindi natin, nilalaban natin na huwag mag-discriminate based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Period.
Walang situation.
Yeah, I think that is pretty clear.
See?
Yeah, okay.
I make my stand very clear on that. Job equity is the key. No discrimination based on anything.
Job equity, but also representation. So that's a really
representation is an important. Like, I'll correct you there too. Representation is important because you represent the stories. You do not represent. I am a gay person. I represent my story in another character. That's not true. If it was my documentary about my biography, then yes, I'm representing my story. Pero I'm representing a character. Diba? So again, key point here is producers have to tell the LGBTQ stories, starting with that. Then you cast based on skill, based on talent, not based on anything else. Kasi discriminatory to be basing it on gender identity and sexual orientation. Those are two different things. And I tell you and I challenge everybody to please see it that way. Because it is very important that you see the distinction, because otherwise you're doing discrimination as well.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Agnes, a short question lang if possible. Yes.
Yeah, talking about translation, in 2011, the Catholic women theologians in the Philippines, we had a gathering and we talked about the difficulty in using the term feminist theology because its association with the West, and other negative things, that are loaded into the term. So we actually, well, personally, I like the term babaylan, babaylan theology, but the term has already been associated with the LGBTQ. So we decided instead by theology. But do you think it is now time to call feminist theology in the Philippines as babaylan theology?
So that question I think is directed to Dr. Lisette. So
is that and Percy also or Neil, because the LGBTQ is
because we have, I think we're 3 minutes beyond the allocated time. Yeah.
We have not really delved into that discussion on what is more appropriate, but the way I encountered the babaylan was really the babaylan. And as far as I know, the babaylan has always welcomed male babaylans into their class. And so I don't see that as a conflict or a confusion, source of confusion. Maganda pa nga na yung babaylan, may body talaga niya yung multiplicity. Maybe I should talk about babaylan, queer multiplicity in the future, not just feminist, So
Because I think while Carolyn Brewer's work argues that it's the femininity of the babaylan that sort of like distinguish that function, the verdict is still out about whether that was actually the case. Because in fact, maraming babaylan figures all across the archipelago at may mga density ang mga male na mga babaylan in different regions eh. And also may mga gender crossers were also babaylan. And so you think about, I think what needs to be sort of argued is what was the babaylan function about? And I think that was Zu Salazar's work, no? At hinanap nga niya yung continuity of the babaylan function across Philippine history. Sabi niya, the contemporary babaylan would include the beauticians. Kasi ang mga shamanistic yung babaylan and they were also shrinks, no? They actually were, you could approach them with your personal problems, with your asawa, right? And they will give you very good advice, no? Kasi they were channeling ancestral wisdom. Okay? At I'm sorry yung mga bading na mga beautician, yung mga board housewife, sila yung mga nagkikwentuhan sila, nakakita na ako niyan, yung mga beautician friends ko, nagbibigay po ng advice ang mga beautician sa mga maraming may bahay na nagpapaganda. Lalo na pag meron silang problema tungkol sa kanilang mga asawa na medyo tumatamlay na ang kanilang
So thank you very much. Yes, Percy, last
No.
word.
Gusto ko lang yung sa beautician kasi totoo lang, the beauticians, yung mga sinasabi ni Neil, they also empower, ha? Kasi pinapaganda mo eh. Tapos, di ba, nakakarinig ka lagi, Day, ang ganda-ganda mo. Day, ang ganda ng buhok mo. Lumalabas yung babae na mas mataas ang self-confidence.
Yes, they are
so it's true.
Information. And they can transform you.
Yes.
Parlor, paglabas mo, iba ka na.
Maganda yan Maganda yung babaylan na beautician. Maganda yan.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Dr. Neil, to cut you off. This is so exciting thread. I think we should have part 2 of this conversation. So before I turn over the mic to Dr. Mike, so despite the positive the overturns of post-colonial resistance from the presentations, albeit visibly confined in mainstream media and Filipino queer activism, there is still much to be done. So specifically for our society to cater to the LGBTQI community. So I have not seen a sustained response from the government as well as the public against violence inflicted on the community. So that is still the sobering thought behind it. But from all these presentations as well as the conversation, I am very happy with the positive, joyful, and hopeful, I think, atmosphere and I think and the spirit that you have shared with us this morning. So thank you very much. Dr. Mike, your turn.
Oh my gosh. I do not know where to begin. Parang puro mic drop ang nangyayari and I couldn't stop myself. I actually had to control myself from commenting on anything. But I hope Percy, Neil, and Lizette, I hope you're also looking at the chat box and also the Q&A because I think there's a general consensus emerging that we do need to have a part 2. Because I think this conversation is really just barely scratching the surface, no? But given the fact that we do have limited time and I just wanted to respect the parameters of our own work, I also just wanted to share on behalf of the sponsoring bodies these certificates of appreciation. And so on behalf of the Department of Theology and Religious Education at De La Salle, the Religious Educators Association of the Philippines, along with the Women's and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines, we would like to present this certificate of appreciation to Percy Intalan, J. Neil C. Garcia, and Lizette Tapia Raquel for invaluable, provocative contribution as resource speakers in the Roundtable Discussion Series, particularly addressing post-colonial Christianities in the areas of gender, feminism, and LGBTQIA+ encounters, held on the 26th of March, 2022, 8 to 10 a.m. So this certificate is extended to you, acknowledged by Dr. Lysander Rivera, who is the chair of the Department of Theology and Religious Education. Dr. Riuel Rito Senyo is the president of the Religious Educators Association of the Philippines, and Dr. Exchel Satyongson, who is the president of the Women's and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines. If you could please just take a moment and do a virtual clap to Percy, to Neil, as well as to Lizette. I think there has to be a book in the making here or something. Truly, Lou. Next, with that, we would like to invite our participants, if you have the time and the interest, to please take a moment to evaluate. You may use either this particular link that's posted or shared on the screen, or you can actually use the QR code. For those,
Mike, while
yes.
we're holding this pala, a volcano was erupting. I think we were saying too many upsetting things.
You know, controversy is always a good thing.
Mother Earth.
Yes. Nabulabog. Nabulabog.
Actually, nagka-clap siya.
Yes.
Nagka-clap.
Yeah, yun. Clap yun, clap. Ganun
Diba?
talaga.
Yun.
Diba?
But truly, I mean, we were thinking about this kind of a conversation, and this really exceeded the interdisciplinarity, the multidimensional, the movement from text to body to virtual bodies, in the ways in which language and words can so shape and also open up possibilities. So thank you po.
What I realize nga is that theological discourse naman pala has radical people like Lizette and you and many others, no? So it's a wonderful eye-opener for me kasi parang theology for me, parang give up na ako dyan. Walang
No.
Don't give up. Let's continue the conversation.
Yes, no, we have to actually. In fact, earlier, as you know, as we're waiting for the evaluation to happen, just wanted to highlight na when you mentioned loob, we were thinking about Dr. Jose de Mesa, the late great Dr. Jose de Mesa, who's written so much about loob and the possibility of that conversation to evolve.
Father Alejo, who of course referenced a lot of the work of
Yes, indeed.
Mesa, di ba?
Yes, definitely.
There are 225 loob derivatives.
Yes.
So
Which I think is
the
really
plurality and the multiplicity of that loob in Ama Namin. So ibig mo sabihin, command ba yan o will yan? Hindi, ang dami-dami niya eh. Pwede natin pakiusapan ng Diyos. Hindi pa natin alam kung ano yung will niya. Pwede pa natin interpret.
Yes, definitely. And so this is first part, and hopefully we'll have a second part and maybe a third part. Multiplicities nga no? But with that, I wanted to at least share with all of the participants here the certificate of appearance. For those of you that were able to complete the roundtable, REAP will be extending the certificate for you once you complete all of the evaluation forms. And so, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. And again, I hope you all enjoy your breakfast. But before we part ways, we wanted to just invoke or at least invite us all to this moment of gratitude. In the words of Jean-Baptiste de La Salle, ipagpapatuloy ko, O Diyos, o kalooban, mukha at paramdam, ang lahat ng aking gawain upang kayo po ay lalong pakaibigin. San Juan Bautista de La Salle, ipanalangin niyo kami. Mabuhay ka Jesus sa aming puso, magpakailanman. Thank you again. And this afternoon, if you still have energy, and I hope you have energy, we have another exciting roundtable, this time addressing Christianities, note the multiplicities, and ecology, as well as post-colonial challenges, with Dr. Maria Florina Aurelius Juan, Dr. Johan de Tavinier, and Dr. Maricel Ibita. Thank you po. Maraming salamat and bago po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lizette, Janie, and Percy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Maraming salamat for sharing.
Sandali, pa-picture muna tayo. Umalis na ba kayo lahat?
Salamat, Jean.
Oh my gosh! That was
We're
amazing.
still on.
Ay, we're still on pa ba?
We're still on.
Mag-picture ka
Oh my
muna,
gosh.
pero we're still on.
This is so amazing. My Lord, we need 5 more hours. Dr. Jean,
Mike,
winner kayo sa moderation.
Will you be the one to take a photo, Mike?
Okay, let me take a photo. Buti kanina kinuha ko ng picture kasama si Neil.
Has
Okay,
Neil
ready?
left?
Yeah, he left already.
Neil, left
Pero
na.
Doc Willard and Doc Ronnie, please.
Maraming salamat. Thank you, Mike.